Welcome on board of this course. I'm extremely excited to have you as a student in this course. This course is all about Node.js, one of the most exciting server-side technologies you can learn these days. And in this course, we'll not just dive into its basics, though we will also do that, but we'll dive into exciting topics like handling file uploads, pagination, working with different databases, SQL and NoSQL databases, for example, building an app where we render views, dynamic HTML on the server, and building RESTful and even GraphQL APIs. Working with real-time data and WebSockets, and much, much more, as you will see in the outline, which will come later in this module. There is a lot of content in this course, and it definitely is no short course, but it will take you from zero to advanced Node.js developer. And by the end of this course, you will have all the knowledge you need to dive deeper into advanced topics and start building your own Node.js projects and applications, of course. And we'll not just learn all of that in theory, we will build real projects in this course. We will build an entire online shop, including checkout and payment with Stripe.js. So there's a lot of content to cover, and I'm really excited to dive into it together with you. Now, who am I? My name is Maximilian Schwarzmüller, and I'm a freelance web developer as well as 5-star rated instructor here on Udemy. I got multiple best-selling courses, and Node.js is a topic that was missing thus far. Well, it isn't anymore, and I had a lot of fun creating this course. I hope you have equally much fun and you learn a lot whilst going through the course. So let's dive in, and let's start with the most important question. What is Node.js? So let's dive into the most important question. What is Node.js? Node.js is a JavaScript runtime. And now what does this mean? You know JavaScript. It's a programming language you typically use in the browser to manipulate your DOM, to manipulate the page which was loaded in the browser. For example, to open a pop-up, a modal, or add any kinds of effects. Because JavaScript is a language that runs in the browser that allows you to interact with the page after it was loaded, and it therefore is a crucial part when it comes to building interactive user interfaces in the browser, so whatever your users see. However, JavaScript is not limited to that. Node.js is a different version of JavaScript, you could say. It is basically built on JavaScript, it adds some features to it, is not capable of doing some other things you can do with JavaScript in the browser. So it basically takes JavaScript and puts it into a different environment. It allows you to run JavaScript code on the server, you could say. In theory, not just on the server, but on any machine though. So it basically allows you to run JavaScript not just in the browser, but anywhere else, like a normal programming language, like normal programs on your computer or some computer in the internet, effectively making it a great choice for building web applications that run on servers, which are just computers running somewhere in the internet. So, in detail, this means that we can use Node.js to run JavaScript outside of the browser. That is the core takeaway. Now, how does this work technically? Well, Node.js uses V8, and V8 simply is the name of the JavaScript engine built by Google that runs JavaScript in the browser. So, back to the browser we now are. V8 is simply the name the creators gave their engine. And what does an engine mean? Well, it simply means that engine takes JavaScript code, the code running in your browser then, or in Node's case, which builds up on V8, also the Node.js JavaScript code. It takes that JavaScript code and compiles it to machine code. And this is what your browser does too, what V8 does in your browser. It does take your JavaScript code and compile it to machine code, because that is the code that runs ultimately on your computer and that can be handled efficiently. Now, this is done by V8. V8 itself is written in C++, but that doesn't really matter too much for you. You don't need to write any C++ code to use JavaScript or Node.js. But Node.js basically takes that V8 code basis, which is written in C++, and adds certain features, like, for example, working with your local file system, opening files, reading files, deleting files. These are all things which are not possible in the browser. You can't access your local file system in the browser for security reasons, so this is not supported. Node.js adds these features to V8's engine, you could say, so that you can suddenly do that. Now, Node.js does not run in the browser, so these restrictions still apply. There you use vanilla V8, so V8 only, without the Node.js extensions. But if you then install Node.js, you can use it to basically use that extended V8 version to run JavaScript scripts on your computer, which then suddenly can access these new features because they don't run in the browser, but are directly executed through that Node.js runtime, you could say. So this is how that works together and what Node.js does. It allows you to run JavaScript on your computer, and it adds useful functionalities to the JavaScript engine so that you can do more useful stuff there than you can do with browser-side JavaScript. Now, one important note maybe on this point also is that, of course, some features are also taken away. In the browser, you use JavaScript to interact with the document object model, so with the HTML elements on your page. If you just execute a JavaScript file directly, you of course have no attached page, and therefore these features are missing. But this is a lot of theory. Why don't we just have a look at this and see how we can install and use Node.js and what it actually does for us? Let's do that in the next lecture. So we want to use Node.js, and the first important step is that we install it. And for that, you have to visit nodejs.org. There you find an installer. In my case here, it picked the right one for my operating system, Mac OS. But you will also find a version for Windows if you're visiting this page on Windows, or you manually choose a different version. And you can, of course, follow along no matter which operating system you're using. The code you write and the steps you need to take to install Node.js are exactly the same. You simply download the latest version here, and you then simply save it anywhere and run the installer this gives you. Now simply follow through all the steps which are mentioned in the installer, accept the license agreement and so on. So simply click through that, install it on your machine, and once this completed, you already got everything you will need to write Node.js code. So this is super fast, it's done here. You can close this now. And now, how do we use Node.js? Well, the easiest way of using it is to open up your local terminal, or on Windows, PowerShell or the command prompt. In that terminal, as a first step, simply run node-v, like this. This should show you the version of Node.js you installed. Now, with that being executed, you can now use Node, just like that, to enter a special input mode, the so-called REPL, I'll come back to that, where you can execute code and have it parsed by Node on the fly. You can use this as a calculator, simply type 2 + 2 to see the result, or you can write whole JavaScript programs there. Now, I won't do that, so you can quit it with Ctrl+C. And instead, let's write a real script which we can execute with Node.js so that we can also see what we can do with it. For that, create a new folder anywhere on your computer and open that folder in your favorite IDE or code editor. Now here, I am using Visual Studio Code. You can find that on code.visualstudio.com. This is a great IDE which I strongly recommend using. It's free. It is really built for usage with JavaScript code. It will work great, and you can simply download it from this page, as I said, for free. Simply walk through the installer. It's also available for Windows and so on. Walk through the installer it gives you, and then once it is installed, simply start it and open that new folder you created somewhere on your computer. This will be your project folder for this very first quick app or script we're going to write. Now, your Visual Studio Code might look a bit different. I'm in full screen mode, which is why you don't see any menu items here at the top. And I also got two important things installed here. The first one is the theme, and you can hit Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P on Windows to go to that quick command interface here. And there, if you type theme, then you can go to the preferences color theme and choose which theme you want to use. And I'm using the dark plus theme here. So if you want to get the exact same coloring, you can choose that. And I also installed an extension. You can view the extension menu by going to View Extensions. Or if you have on the left a menu, you can also click on the Extensions tab there, but View Extensions will do, or the shortcut you see there. And there I installed the Material Icon theme. This theme here. I already got that installed, and this gives me some special file icons and so on. You don't need that, you just can use it if you want to have the exact same layout, and thereafter you can go back to the View Explorer here. Now this is then my setup. I got a git ignore file here since I'll use git for version management. You don't need that. And with that, let's simply create a new file here with Control-N, Command-N, or by clicking that icon here. And then simply give it any name you want, like first app.js. .js is of course important because we're creating a JavaScript app here. Now in there, we can run any code Node.js is capable of executing. And for this, I will write a simple script. I will simply write console log hello from Node.js. Now you could write this in the browser too. The browser would be capable of running this, and it would log this in the JavaScript console in your browser DevTools. Now you can also execute this with Node.js though. For this, go back to your terminal or command prompt and make sure you navigate into that new folder you created with the help of CD and so on. You can alternatively also go back to Visual Studio Code, and there under View, you can open that terminal, and it will give you your default system terminal already navigated into that folder. So that's a bit more convenient. And then here you can run node, and now first-app.js, so that file name. If you now hit enter, you should see hello from Node.js here because this executes your code. And this already shows you that Node is JavaScript on your computer. This is not using a browser, it's just using the internal engine, the extended internal JavaScript engine used by the browser to execute your code locally, totally outside of a browser. And of course, we can also do more than just logging something. Let's, for example, write this text to a file. For this, we can import something from the Node.js environment. I mentioned that it would add new features to JavaScript, right? You have to import them, and I'll come back to the detailed import syntax and which features exist a little bit later. For now, just follow along to have this first quick demo and create a new constant. I'll also give you a brief refresher about constants and JavaScript in this course. And then type require fs. fs stands for file system, and this syntax simply imports some file system functionalities into this JavaScript file so that we can use these functionalities there. We can now use fs write file sync here to create a new file. And this takes a couple of arguments. And the first argument is the path where you want to store that file. And that also includes the file name. Now I want to create it in that same folder, so I will simply name it hello.txt, for example. And the second argument is the data we want to put in there. And there I will just put hello from Node.js. With this, if we now save this and we re-execute this with Node first app.js, you should have a hello text file here. And this gives you the text written in there. And this is something you couldn't do in the browser because there you can't access your local file system. And obviously it's features like this which you need to then also create a server, which we don't have at this point, by the way. This is not a website, obviously. It's just some utility script. And this is something we can do with Node.js. Now, this was a first quick demo. We'll learn all the cool features and how this works and what exactly this syntax is throughout the course, of course. So you hopefully got a first picture of what Node.js is and why you use it and what you use it for. Now, typically, and also what we will do in this course, you use Node.js to run it on a server, to write server-side code. And for that, we have to have a look at the full picture. We have our users using a client. computer with a browser, their mobile phone with a browser, even mobile apps. And we will come back to how Node.js can communicate with these later in the course too. But for now, let's stick to the traditional browser picture. We got our users using their browser, and there we can use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in the browser, to create web pages, right? Now, they visit a page, mypage.com, and they send a request to do so. For example, by entering a URL in the browser, a request is sent to that URL. Now, there, the server comes into play. We got our server, some computer running in the internet, which has the IP associated with that domain, which is automatically resolved for us. And on that server, we then want to execute some code that does something with the incoming request and returns a response. Often, but not necessarily always, as you will learn, this response is a HTML page, which the browser then in turn can display. By the way, it is not necessarily just HTML. It's also things like CSS files or JavaScript files with JavaScript code for the browser, not for the server. Now, on the server, we typically do tasks that we can't or don't want to do from inside the browser for performance or security reasons. We connect to databases, for example, to fetch and store data. We do user authentication, which we obviously can only do on a place the user can't access to make it more secure and avoid it being hacked. We do it for input validation to see if a user entered the correct email address. The browser can always be tricked. Users can even edit their browser-side code. You can open the developer tools and start working on that page you're on. But the server is, of course, sheltered from that. The user can't access it. And in general, we have our business logic on the server. Everything our users shouldn't see, which takes too much time to run in the browser, where we obviously want to deliver a fast user experience, or anything of that kind. And that is where we use Node.js. So also JavaScript code, but this time not on the browser, but on the server. And this is where we use the many features Node.js gives us. And this is how we indirectly allow our users to work with the server through that request-response pattern. The direct access is not available. So this is how we will use Node.js in this course also. We will use it to write code on the server that returns data our users, our clients, can work with. Now, one important side note at this point of time. Node.js is not limited to running code on a server. It's a JavaScript runtime, and you even saw a first demo which did not do anything where we needed a browser, right? We didn't spin up a server there. We didn't do anything which we would have reached through a browser. We'll do that a lot throughout the course, but we haven't done it thus far. Because it's just a JavaScript runtime, we can execute any JavaScript code with Node.js. And often that is code that runs on a server and is executed upon incoming requests. But you also often use Node.js for other code. For example, for local utility scripts or build tools. If you worked with, let's say, React or Angular or Vue or anything of that kind, you actually used Node.js indirectly a lot for all the build processes these languages or frameworks needed. Because Node.js is a great tool for writing utility scripts. You have access to the file system, so you can write and read and manipulate files. And this allows you to do a lot of utility stuff on your computer that is never exposed to the public. And I just want you to know that, and I'll even have a section in this course where I dive a little bit more in such build tools and non-server-side language usages of Node.js. In general, and that is the most popular thing you do with Node.js though, you use it in the context of web development and server-side code. So you use it to run a server, and actually, and that is an important difference to PHP, for example, with Node.js, you don't just write the code that is running on your server, you also write the server yourself. So the code that takes the incoming requests and routes them to your, well, other code. In PHP, you have extra tools like Apache or Nginx, which run the servers, which listen to incoming requests and then execute your PHP code. Here, Node.js does both. It does that listening, and it then also does whatever you want to do in your code. So that's important, and that's something you'll see in action soon. We also use it, or we therefore also use it to run all our business logic. So not just to listen to incoming requests, but to then work with the request data, work with files, work with databases, all that fun stuff Node.js is capable of, and we'll do all that in this course, obviously. And we also handle the response side, not just incoming requests. You will also learn how you use Node.js to send back data to your clients, be that HTML pages with dynamic content, or data only in the format of JSON or XML or even files. So this is what we use Node.js and what we will dive heavily into in this course. Alternatives to Node.js would be things like Python, also with frameworks like Flask or Django, or PHP with frameworks like Laravel maybe, or standalone vanilla PHP of course, and more. ASP.NET, Ruby on Rails, all that stuff. This basically are all replacements for Node.js, or Node.js can be a replacement for them. And there is no clear winner. All these languages are capable of doing the same kind of stuff. And of course, they differ in some technical regards. But in general, it's great to have that broad variety. The huge advantage, or one huge advantage of Node.js, is that it uses JavaScript, a language which you need so much in modern web development, for all the front end, for some build tools. And if you then can also use it on the server side, you don't need to learn a bunch of different languages. You can use one and the same language and then use that for your server-side code too. This is why Node.js is a great language to learn. You get so much efficiency out of it. It's also a highly performant and popular language. There are so many jobs out there for Node.js. There never was a better time to learn it. It's used in so many environments, also for a lot of cutting-edge stuff. But in general, Node.js is a great solution. It's trending, it's fast, it's efficient, and it makes sure that you only need to learn one language to write all the code you need in a modern web application. Now that we had a look at the basics about Node.js, what we can do with it, and now that we even used it, let me walk you through the content of this course and explain what's in the course and where you can find what. We're almost done getting started. In the next module, I will give you a brief JavaScript refresher, just to make sure we're all on the same page regarding the core JavaScript syntax, but more importantly, about some next-gen JavaScript features which we'll use in the course. Basic JavaScript knowledge is assumed and will not be taught in that module, but if you just need a refresher, some additional information, or this next-gen JavaScript knowledge, then this is a module you should take, otherwise it's optional. Now, after this refresher, or immediately after this module, if you don't need the refresher, we'll dive into the Node.js basics, how it generally works, how we can work with streams of data, and some core Node.js modules. So really the nitty-gritty details you need to know about the language, so to say. And we'll then dive into efficiently developing with Node.js, how you can debug your code, handle errors, and so on. Now thereafter, we'll dive into Express.js, the most popular framework you can use for Node.js. I'll explain why we use it and why we still, in its heart, use Node.js, why we still learn about Node.js even though we use Express.js. Because using it makes sense, it makes things easier. You will use it if you are working with Node.js, but still, of course, we still use Node.js with all of that. Now, thereafter, we'll dive into templating engines. That are basically some tools, you could say, that allow you to generate HTML pages on the server with dynamic content encoded in them. And that is how you can return different pages or pages with different content back to your users. So that will be an important module. Now thereafter, we'll dive into the model view controller pattern, what that is and why we use it, and of course, how we use it. And we'll then have a look at some advanced routing concepts. Routing is something we'll also learn in the Express.js module, and we'll dive deeper into the models of the model view controller pattern. Now, after we're done with that, it's time to dive into databases. And we'll start by connecting our Node application with a SQL database, MySQL to be precise. As a next step, we'll dive deeper into that and use a package that makes working with SQL databases easier, SQLize. Now, and after having seen SQL, we'll continue with NoSQL and see how we would use that. And we'll use Mongoose there to also make working with that easier. And we'll then stick to NoSQL for the rest of the course, but you'll thoroughly learn both SQL and NoSQL. Now, after this, we'll dive into sessions and cookies, what that is, why you use it, and how you use it. We'll have a look at authentication, so how we can make sure that users can sign up and sign in with our application. We'll dive into sending emails, how that would work. How can we auto-generate emails when a user signs up, for example? We'll also dive into advanced authentication features and also authorization, which means that, for example, only a user who created a product can edit or delete it. We'll then have a look at user input validation, which is a crucial part in any web application because you want to make sure that the data your users enter into your forms is correct and valid, and you'll learn how you can do that efficiently in this module. And we'll then dive into error handling because errors will happen. For example, if the user enters wrong input. And I will show you how you can handle different kinds of errors in an elegant way. Now, thereafter, we'll dive into something important. File up and downloads. How can you handle these? How can you write code that takes incoming files, stores them, and is able to return files? I'll also show you how you can automatically generate PDF documents on the server in this module. We'll then have a look at pagination, so how we can return our data in chunks instead of all the data at once, which is not ideal for your bandwidth. We'll thereafter have a look at async request, and I'll explain what that is and how we can handle it with Node.js. And we'll then dive into payments. How can we accept payments through a service called Stripe.js? Obviously something we'll need in any shop we build. And thereafter, we'll dive into a different kind of application you can build with Node.js. We'll dive into REST APIs. And one module does not sound like a lot of content on this very important technology, but actually I got 2 modules on that, and we'll also dive into file uploads in REST APIs, authentication, pagination, and all that stuff. And additionally, these modules will build up on the entire modules before that, because you will learn that a REST API does not differ that much from a normal Node application, and I will show you in detail which knowledge you still need and how you need to change some things, not that many actually, to turn an existing application into a REST API. Now, and once we're done with that, I will dive into more modern JavaScript feature, async await, and how you can use that in your Node application. And we'll dive into WebSockets and Socket.io. This is a technology or a set of technologies that allows you to add real-time functionalities to your app. So for example, if one user sends a message and you instantly want to notify another user, you can use WebSockets for that, and I will show how that works in this module. After this module, we'll dive into a different kind of APIs. We had a look at REST APIs. We'll then have a look at GraphQL APIs. GraphQL is a very modern and popular way of building APIs. It has some advantages over REST APIs, also some disadvantages, and I will dive into GraphQL and how it differs from REST APIs in this module, and I will show you how to build a GraphQL API from scratch with Node.js. And this will be quite a big module, even though it's only one block on this slide. Now, thereafter, we'll have a look at deployment. How can you take your application you built, all your Node code you built, how can you take that and move it to a real server in the web and ensure that it runs there? This will be shown there. There, I'll also dive into things like setting up SSL encryption. And once we're done with that, I'll have a short module on Node.js functionalities beyond creating web servers with it, because you can use it for other things too, as I will mention there. And then we're done. I'll end the course by giving you some next steps, potential ideas on how to continue, and by then you will have learned a lot about Node.js and Express and the many other things we'll dive into in this course. I hope you are as excited as I am. And with that, let's quickly move on so that we can quickly get to the point where we write code. So now that you learned what's inside this course, a whole lot, as you can see, let me explain to you how you can get the most out of this course. Because this is really important to me. I want to make sure that you learn a lot. Now, obviously, you want to watch the videos. Now, that seems pretty obvious, but this is a video on demand course. Watch the videos at your speed. This is really important. You can use the playback controls here on Udemy to fine-tune the speed. Speed me up if I'm going too slow, reduce the speed a bit if I'm going too fast. Also make sure to occasionally jump back to older sections or videos. This is a normal process in learning. Sometimes you need to reiterate concepts you learned before. You want to use that on-demand nature of the course. You don't have to go at the speed I'm going. You don't have to go lecture by lecture and then never go back. Use the tools you got here. Use the course to its fullest potential and use the on-demand nature. In this course, we will also build projects and you will find a lot of exercises and assignments. I encourage you to do these. Of course, you can also just watch me code and just watch my solutions to the assignments, but you will learn way more if you try to solve these things on your own and if you actively code along. Now, one important note for this is, of course, that you want to do that also at your speed and by, well, of course, also following along the videos, but also make sure to Google for problems if you hit any. Not because I don't want to help you, I will help you if you need help, but because this makes you a better learner. You need to be able to solve your problems on your own. And I see too many students who have a ask first, research later mentality. And this is not really that great for you. This makes me learn it better because I get challenged a lot, which is great, but you should learn more ultimately. So definitely try to solve your problems on your own. It will help you a lot. Also, use all the course resources you find in there. That's not just the videos. That's also the attached source code, which you find attached to the last lecture of each module, which you can use to compare it to your code if you're facing any problems. And again, this is a great way of solving problems on your own by comparing the solutions and finding out what went wrong on your own. So use all these resources. Also make sure to use the additional links I occasionally post in some lectures, where you can research a bit more about certain topics and dive a bit deeper in cases where you're interested in that topic. Now, last but not least, this course, like all Udemy courses, has a Q&A section. You can post questions on every video. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the video or in the course dashboard, the general Q&A section. And you can search there. Make sure to also search the Q&A before you post. Often a question has already been answered, but you can also post there if you got a question. Now, the thing about asking is easy, answering is hard. So try helping others too. Take this opportunity of answering to questions of other students, simply because you, again, get challenged. And if you're wrong, that doesn't matter. You'll be corrected and you'll learn again. But you will learn so much by being forced to think about a problem, articulate a solution, and the best of all, you also help other students. So help each other. I will also help you, of course. But if you do all these things, you'll get a lot out of this course. Promised. But with that, let's leave this first module and continue with the course. Now, before we finally dive into the JavaScript refresher, or optionally, in case you skipped that, into the Node.js basics, let me dive into two different ways of executing your Node code. One way of executing it, which I briefly mentioned earlier in this module, is the REPL. REPL stands for read, reading user input, eval, evaluating user input, print, outputting a result, and L, loop, for returning and waiting for a new input. And the REPL is what you use if you just type Node into your terminal. Here I am in the terminal, or on Windows, this would be your command prompt. And there, if you just type Node with Node installed, you are now in the REPL, which you can identify by the fact that you now don't have that full path and your computer name at the beginning, but just that greater than sign. And there you can execute Node commands like console log, 2+2, or also writing, interacting with files. You can import the file system there, just as we did it previously in our file. and then we can use that to write a file synchronously and so on. So that will all work here. And this is, of course, an environment where we don't store our code in files, but we write our Node application with every line. The lines don't work independent from each other, so I can now use the file system package, for example, now that I imported it one line earlier. But once I quit out of this process with Control-C, I'm done. This is not saved anywhere. This is not a file I can execute again, and this therefore is a great playground. The alternative to running codes is that you execute files as we did it before, and as we will basically do it for the rest of this course. This is the alternative to using the REPL. When you execute files, the advantage, of course, is, and that is why we use it for real apps, that we write our code in advance and we can always execute it. And when we build a real app, we want to save our code, of course, in files, which we can then deploy in the end, which we could share with our developers, and where we can also pause our work and pick up later, and where we never lose the code we write. But the REPL is a great playground because we can use it to run some commands, to try out certain things, because we execute code as we write it. And therefore, these are the two ways of running your Node code. Obviously, we'll go with the store code in files approach in this course, but whenever I say REPL, I'm referring to this direct input way, which I can recommend for trying out some features, but not for writing real applications. That is not what you would do. I just wanted to get these two ways out of the way. We'll focus on the left one here. And with that, let's dive into writing some code with the next modules.